All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another Toonkind RP Read Aloud. My name is Mira, and I will be reading Sammy Jacks. And with me is...
I'm excited, apparently. My name is Whis, and I'm reading for Chifley Ford.
All right. There is a little bit of angst that happens in the later half of the RP, and also just slight angst where Sammy and Chifley talk about a few things regarding backstory stuff. So I would say,
if you know these boys, you know what's going on.
yeah. If you know the boys' backstories, you know what discussions are going to be had. So I would say mild angst, just fair warning.
Yeah.
There is a bit of angst scattered through the fluff. But with that out of the way, I am going to start reading. Sammy nervously tucks his hair behind his ear as he fidgets outside of Chifley's apartment, just staring at the door. His shading is just the slightest trace of lilac. He's well dressed, Prismatone insisted, with a watercolor dress that fades into a darker black the lower it goes, and a rainbow shawl that's still slightly see-through and gauzy but as smooth as silk. His lower face is hidden by his mask, and he's wearing black slip-on flats. His hair is wrapped up in another elaborate hairstyle, Prismatone having expertly weaved his rainbow locks into submission, leaving his red and orange bangs to frame his face. He'd felt awful when he'd figured out what Gil had fully planned to do. The letter had been something Chifley had clearly put time and effort into making. No, he had totally not blushed so dark he'd felt like his face was going to remain on fire for 100 years. Prismatone, please stop laughing. He was trying to save some composure. And so he'd asked Chifley on a date. A date! He still couldn't believe he'd done it. He stares at the door to Chifley's apartment and sucks in a deep breath, raises his hand, and raps smartly against the door with his knuckles.
There was a shuffling behind the door before it opened a crack. Chifley peered out of the gap in the door shyly before opening it all the way, eyes a little wide and cheeks a little flushed. Hi, Sammy.
Sammy's shading is a buttery gold and pink as he beams at Chifley, and he more firmly tucks his hair behind his ears. Hi, Chifley. You ready to go?
Chifley was just in his normal clothes. Yeah, He looked Sammy up and down once. I didn't realize I should dress up.
You didn't need to, Sammy hastens to reassure, the pink growing stronger and more vibrant than the yellow. I just wanted to look good for you. That's all. Prismatone helped.
Chifley was clearly impressed by the effort undertaken. You look beautiful, he said softly. He looked down at himself. I look so average next to you.
Sammy puffs out his cheeks. Don't say that! You look super cute! You always look super cute! You dress smartly, and your palette always looks really nice, and your clothes are comfy, and I should know, I mended them myself. As long as you're comfortable, that's the most important thing! Prismatone always talks about how fashion isn't really all that's cracked up to be, because if it brings the owner comfort, that's the most important thing! He reaches over and gently takes Chifley's hands in his gaze and voice softening to something gentle and understanding. But if you really want, you can change into something that makes you feel more comfortable, Chifley. Dinner won't be going anywhere just yet, but I do think you look rather dashing in your normal clothes.
He went stiff, blushing vividly. I don't... He trailed off. Hold on. And he started looking through his hammer space. After a bit of looking, he pulled out a small travel bag. He put it on the floor and opened it up. You wouldn't mind, he whispered to himself.
Sammy blinks and watches Chifley open the travel bag up, but gets absolutely distracted by the pretty pattern of his voice dancing across his vision in sunset colors. So distracted, he doesn't even register the words. Chifley, have I told you how pretty your voice is? Because it's very pretty. Sammy's voice is faint as he practically goes cross-eyed to look at the particularly pretty pattern waft in front of his nose.
Chifley fumbles with the fabric in his hands. Uh, no, I don't think you did before. Can you see it?
Sammy hums with a distracted nod. Only sometimes. It's something that started happening after I met Prismatone. You and Gil have pretty voices. His pops, while yours is more gentle. The contrast is nice. I like both of you a lot. It makes sense your voices are so beautiful, because you both are really pretty people.
He dropped what he was holding, staring at Sammy with very round eyes, pale face blanketed in a blush that seemed to trail down his neck.
Sammy doesn't notice at first, the colors wafting in and out of his vision very distractingly. Your voice is like a sunset. He trails off, and then his shading goes bright, rich highlighter pink as his mind catches up to what he was saying.
Chifley was still wordlessly staring at him, a strange, stunned sort of look on his face.
Sammy starts to stutter, face flaming so hot he feels like he could fry an egg. He trails off into silence again and stares at Chifley, anxiously fidgeting with his rainbow shawl. I mean it, he says quietly. You're really pretty, Chifley. It makes sense your voice would match.
He blinked out of his stupor. I'm not, he answered quietly, bending down to pick up the clothes he had dropped.
You are, though. Others might not think so, but I do, Sammy says firmly. You're a cute person, Chifley. Anyone who says otherwise can get my fist in their face because they're being picnics and deserve a knuckle sandwich crafted by me.
He fiddled with the cloth in his hands. He clearly didn't agree, but when it was said so passionately, who was he to argue? I should go get changed, he said softly. Feel free to come in while you wait, if you like.
Sammy's face softens even more. Okay, he agrees, and as he approaches, he gently squeezes Chifley's shoulder. I'll just have to keep reminding you that you're pretty until you believe it. His voice is soft and fond, like he doesn't mind repeating himself over and over if needed.
He smiled and rushed over to one of the bedrooms, closing the door behind him. There was a pause, and then the faint sound of embarrassed yet somehow delighted screaming into a pillow trickled under the door.
Sammy giggles quietly to himself and rubs his own burning cheeks. He glances around, then lets out a delighted gasp as he lays eyes on a familiar painting. He's nearly vibrating, shading a sunshine yellow by the time Chifley returns.
Chifley came out a few minutes later. Instead of his usual cloak and jacket, he was wearing a white button-up shirt with a dark blue waistcoat over the top. It was tightened with the strap at the back, but still looked like it had been a bit too big. Does this look okay?
Sammy glances over from the painting, and his eyes crinkle to golden moons in what Chifley would immediately know as a large, genuine grin, sharp teeth and all. You look amazing! He excitedly bounces over to the smaller Toon and takes his hand in his. Chif, 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 Chif! You hung the painting I made for you up! His shading is bright highlighter yellow, edged with a subtle rose.
He blushed and rubbed the back of his head. Thanks. I wasn't sure it'd fit. The blush threatened to take over his whole face when Sammy took his hand. Of course, it's too lovely not to display.
Sammy lets out a distracted hum, swinging their hands back and forth slightly. I'm glad you liked it, and you look really good in that. Blue is a really good look on you. His voice is soft, and he's looking at you with a very gentle expression on his face, Chifley. He means every word of it. He gently squeezes Chifley's hand. You feel comfortable now? He asks, care interwoven thickly in his voice.
He giggled softly. I have my father's colors, thankfully.
Sammy nods and squeezes Chifley's hand again. You look good, he repeats. His eyes are still crinkled, but in a softer way, like he's gently smiling. You ready to head out?
Chifley nodded. Yes. Sorry for the delay.
Sammy shakes his head, still smiling in his own way. It's all right, Chif. I could wait forever if it meant you felt comfortable.
He blushed and offered a squeeze to Sammy's hand. Lead on.
Sammy squeezed back and then gently started to tug him forward. He let Chifley lock the apartment and then started leading him down to the streets below. It's not too far of a walk, just a few blocks or so. How do you feel about pasta?
Oh, yes. Sounds great. He grinned. Missy loves pasta.
Sammy grins, eyes turning again to gold half moons. Great! How is she doing, by the way? Is school treating her well?
Mm-hmm. Chifley nodded. She made a friend on her very first day. I was so pleased for her.
Sammy's shading shifts to a bright yellow. Oh, I'm so glad! His feet do a little tap, 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 half dance, half shuffle that doesn't truly change his gait or walk cycle, just naturally works in his full body of excitement at the news.
She is happier now that she has friends, he added, a soft smile taking over his features. Her nightmares are less.
I'm glad, Sammy says softly. His hand gently squeezes at Chifley's in a soothing manner. Nightmares are... I'm sorry she's had them so young.
Everyone has nightmares, he said gently. It just hurts to listen to. Now, I can ask her if she had any dreams, and she can tell me about a dream where she and Rad climbed to the top of a mountain to put a flag on top, or turning into mermaids to find treasure at the bottom of the sea. It's much nicer.
Oh, she's met Rad, Bob's kid, right? He's nice. Bob, I didn't get to interact with Rad much. He ran into one of the shrines I found to say hi to Prismatone. I'm glad they're both friends and that she's happier things to draw from for dreams. He looked at Chifley and then worries his lips slightly. Do you have them too? He asked quietly.
Chifley's smile fell, and he looked away quietly.
Sammy gently squeezes Chifley's hand. Hey, we can make happy memories to help us both then, he softly says. His shading is a rich blue, edged with the tiniest linings of purple.
There was a moment while Chifley absorbed those words. But then he looked up and smiled. Yes, I do like the sounds of that.
Sammy's eyes crease in a smile, and he squeezes Chifley's hand again. He looks up and blinks. Oh, we're here! Come on, let's get some pasta!
Yes, he giggled. Do you know what kind you're getting?
Sammy hums as he tugs Chifley inside the restaurant. I think spaghetti. Barkston got it for us once for dinner, and it was really good!
Oh, with a red meat sauce? He wondered. Our mother used to make that for us a lot.
I think it had meatballs. There was a really nice red sauce with it, too. Coda stole my meatball, though. Barkston had to talk me out of tackling him.
He snorted and then laughed a bit. From what I saw of Coda, that does not seem out of character for him.
Sammy grumbles quietly. No, it's not out of character at all.
I should like to meet him properly one day, Chifley told him. I suspect he and Missy would get along. Perhaps too well.
Sammy's expression turns worried. Gil and Coda met, and in that time Coda managed to destroy one of Barkston's pots and fill up the entire apartment with smoke. That was me leaving for an hour. And Gil, being an adult, probably only made it a little less worrying because I know with him he wouldn't do anything crazy enough to get either of them killed. 2 kids up to mischief? Oh no. But then his expression turns fond. But Coda needs more friends. If we maybe supervise? I think they would get along after Coda stopped being so standoffish about things. He hasn't had the best life. Stereotypes tend to do that to a tune. A cream and brown dog waitress with the long floppy ears and other features of a King Charles Cavalier Spaniel moved to the greeting podium with a smile on her Franconale face and a tail wagging furiously. Welcome to Tony's! Table for 2?
Chifley nodded at Sammy. Yes, supervised meat. I don't know what they would do otherwise. He shifted his attention to the waitress and her lively jazz piano theme. Yes, please, for 2.
The waitress smiles a warm doggy grin at the 2 of them and grabs a few menus from underneath the podium. Right this way, then! She leads them to a part of the restaurant that is painted to look like an Italian countryside at night. Gentle dancing lights of orange and yellow hues floating around the room and giving it a nice atmospheric glow. The table she sits them both in is nested under a built-in archway with a mural that overlooks a river winding through the countryside.
Thank you so much, he says to her.
You two enjoy your meal, she cheerfully replies. Your server will be James, and he'll help you all get taken care of, all right? She hands out the menus and then walks back towards the front of the restaurant. Sammy looks down at it, and his eyes visibly widen at all the choices. Oh, wow. I didn't know there were so many different pasta dishes. What do you want?
Chifley's eyes lingered over the listed dish that matched his brief description for a long moment, a light frown on his face for a second. Then he pointed at a different dish. This one comes in a large cheese wheel, apparently.
Sammy stares at Chifley for a moment, visibly boggling. Why would we need a cheese wheel?
I don't know. How big is a cheese wheel?
Sammy stares at the menu for a second. His shading is gray and his eyebrows are creased. I don't know. I always thought they came in little triangles.
The dish isn't very expensive. Oh, I like cheese. He had a rather cute, ponderous expression on his face. Should I get it and find out?
Sammy's shading is pink as pink can be as he rests his elbow on the table, cheek resting in his palm. His eyes are soft as he gazes at Chifley, a clear smile under his mask. Go for it if you want, he says warmly.
Chifley beamed and put the menu down. I will get that, then. What about you?
Sammy stares down at his menu and visibly stalls at all the choices for a minute. I think I'll go with spaghetti still. That's familiar, he decided.
Which one?
Sammy glances back down. Meatball one? He says, but the way he says it makes it a question entirely.
He looked down at the menu to find the dish in question. Oh, that one does look good. He smiled. I won't take your meatballs from you, so please go ahead.
Sammy giggles. I don't mind sharing, though, he says shyly, tucking his orange lock behind his ear, if you want.
Chifley just giggled. A fond blush on his cheeks.
It's right about then that their waiter, a grey schnauzer Fringnelli Toon, approached their table with a friendly grin and a wagging tail. Hello, hello! What can I get you started for you two? Drinks? Appetizers? Or are you ready to order?
Oh, we didn't think about that. Did you want a drink or something? I'm happy with just water.
Sammy shot a glance at Chifley as the shading went bright pink. What? Water would be fine, he squeaked. The waiter nodded, scribbling that down. Do you two folks know what you want yet, or do you need some more time to figure it out?
Oh, no, we have decided. He moved the menus so that he could point and the waiter could see. Can I try the cheese wheel, that?
The waiter beams at Chifley and obligingly leans a little closer to see the menu. Excellent choice, and for you, sir. He directs at Sammy. Could I have the spaghetti and the meatballs? Sammy points at his own menu. Oh, a classic. Excellent choices all around. Here, gentlemen, I'll get those waters out to you and let the kitchen know your orders so they can start working on them as quick as they can.
Chifley grinned. Thank you.
The waiter tips his fluffy head and gathers their menus and heads off towards the kitchen. Sammy looks at Chifley and can't help the grin that spread underneath his mask, shading buttery gold airbrushed with rose, and his cheek was resting in his palm.
Chifley turned back to Sammy, but then blinked. What is it?
I'm glad you're here, he softly says, and then the pink goes deep and saturated as his mind catches up to what he just said. There is a quiet, strangled squeak.
Chifley blushed darkly. Well, I like spending time with you. He paused ever so slightly. I'd hardly want to be anywhere else.
Sammy's pink spreads until it's all is shading, but it's softer, more rose now. Yeah, me too. I wanted to apologize for Gil. He told me a little bit before, but only that he was going to do something, and by the time I figured he was going to grab you, well, I couldn't warn you because it already had happened. He reaches over and gently takes Chifley's hand. I know Gil won't apologize. He means it in a fun way, but, well, sometimes what's fun for him isn't so fun for others necessarily.
Chifley smiled understandingly. It's all right. Well, apart from tackling me to the ground and knocking the wind out of me, and there was a small shift in the tone of his words, tying me up, and a small shift in his shoulders. He did not treat me poorly.
Sammy gently squeezes Chifley's hand. You weren't tied up when I found you two, he says softly.
He nodded. He untied me, because I asked him to.
Sammy's expression softens minutely. I'm glad. I would have punched him again if he didn't listen.
Chifley looked alarmed. Punch him?
Sammy's shading turns a bright spring green. Yes? He deserved it, though. He mutters the last bit under his breath.
Chifley frowned. What on earth did he do to deserve it?
He charmed a security guard when we first met, and then I promised if he'd use that damn spell again, I would punch him. And he did when he snuck into Dodo Studios. So when we met again, I punched him.
Ah. He nodded quietly. Actually, Sammy, I had been wanting to talk to you about that.
Sammy freezes. Yes? There is the slightest tinge of purple in his shading.
He looked awkward. I also know a number of spells from that school.
Sammy's hand spasms in Chifley's hand from the force of the flinch that shakes his body. What had just been a simple lilac now was a deep purple. You... He takes a deep breath. You don't... I understand if you use it to save your life or someone else's, but Chifley, please tell me you don't use it outside of that. And Sammy's voice breaks.
Utter heartbreak showed on Chifley's face at that tone. No, of course not, he squeaked. I wanted to let you know in case if I ever needed to use them, it wouldn't catch you off guard. He grasped Sammy's hand with both of his. I don't use them frivolously, I promise.
Sammy pulls Chifley's hands up and brings them to his face, curling around their intertwined fingers as best as he can, despite the table in the way. I don't... Okay, I'm just... Don't use them on me. Please.
Of course, he responded at once. You have my word. And he was dead serious. If it is any comfort, I've only used one of the 3 before, and it didn't really help, so I've not used it since.
Sammy kisses Chifley's knuckles with the cloth covering his mouth, and you can feel something wet hit the back of your hands.
He stood immediately and rounded the table and pulled Sammy into a tight hug.
Sammy wraps his arms around Chifley and buried his head into Chifley's neck. Maybe just before you use them, could you warn me? That was Dr. Page does with the triggers, right? The cello that belongs to Sammy's theme is soft and sad, but there's something warm and healing. That this was a step in the right direction.
Chifley rubbed his back gently. Yeah, she does, he whispered. I hope I never have to.
Thank you for telling me, Sammy whispers into Chifley's shoulder. I hope you never have to either.
He leant back from Sammy a little, smiling. Then he leant in again and kissed Sammy's cheek.
Sammy's shading immediately goes brighter highlighter pink as his eyes go wide, and then his shading goes bright highlighter yellow. Oh. Sammy is melting in Chifley's arms.
His smile grew with that pink shade. I think we need a happier topic of conversation, he told him. Eating over poor sentiment is bad luck.
Sammy lets out a soft little hum, and then his shading shifts to an orange as he leans up and kisses Chifley on his cheek. He leans back, his shading bright pink again.
He blushed and gazed at Sammy wide-eyed. I rather like that, he said softly, though through the mask was a little odd. He giggled, pale cheeks in a vivid blush.
I don't think Prismatone would mind if we, Sammy's entire face is starting to grow pink. Or the apartments, or, Sammy trails off into a mumble.
No offense meant to Mr. Boxon, but my place is cleaner. He giggled. And Coda may not appreciate it much.
Sammy lets out a little groan and thumps his head against Chifley's shoulder for a moment and grumbles in quiet little growlicks. Yeah, between him and Coda, trying to keep that place clean or tidy is a nightmare.
It seems a little crowded, Chifley agreed, patting Sammy's arm fondly before moving to take his seat, though keeping hold of one of Sammy's hands as he did so.
Sammy doesn't let go of Chifley's hand and instead squeezes it gently. It is a bit, Sammy admits. Billy, he never expected to keep us this long, he softly says. He never expected kids, and it kinda shows. I appreciate the fact that he took Coda and I off the streets after everything, but sometimes it feels like all I've brought either of them is trouble. Before the conversation can continue, the waiter comes back with the glasses of water. Sorry for the wait! Your food will be out shortly, he reassures.
Chifley smiled up at the waiter. Thank you very much.
The waiter beams at the two of them and takes his leave. Hopefully, when he returns, he'll bring the food. Sammy is still holding Chifley's hand, idly watching the waiter go by and slightly swinging their intertwined hands a little back and forth.
Chifley waited until he had walked away. You know, I understand that sentiment of not expecting kids, he said softly, turning to look back at Sammy.
Sammy lets out a quiet hum, tilting his head in clear invitation for Chifley to elaborate if he wishes.
I became Missy's guardian very suddenly, he continued, and so I cannot imagine that Mr. Boxon would think either of you were a bother.
Sammy sits and he thinks. He nods, but it's clear he doesn't believe it. There's a dark note in his melody, a refrain Chifley only recognizes because he's heard it when Sammy first mentioned being charmed by bad people.
Chifley frowned a little. Have you talked to Mr. Boxon about it?
Sammy shakes his head. I don't want to bother him, he says. If I just stay out of trouble, everything will be fine. He doesn't need to worry.
Chifley gave Sammy a long look. I think this applies for both of us, but staying out of trouble doesn't seem like much of an option.
Sammy's shoulders slump. No, you're right.
With your nemesis being who he is and all.
Sammy's shading goes hot pink again. You're right, he groans.
He smiled. I have a question, Sammy.
Sammy lets out an inquisitive noise, tilting his head as the shading turns blue-tinted evergreen.
The way your theme is written, are you Ghiblian? He wondered.
Oh, sorry. Sammy nods. Yeah, I spend most of the year in a small provincial town in Ghibli. It's not really on the map anymore.
I have never been to Ghibli. He leant forward and smiled encouragingly. He was not going to let Sammy dwell. Nope, not at all. What is it like?
It was really nice. There were so many festivals growing up. Miss Nana would take me go next town over if I got all my schooling done. Not that my parents knew. They would have never let me go. He absent-mindedly rubs at the wrist holding Chifley's hand, but he doesn't notice. They'd often hold festivals over there instead of our town, because it wasn't as well laid out for it. Too cramped or something. His shading is yellow, though there is a streak of gray that correlates with the confused crease of his eyebrows.
Oh, I have heard about Ghiblian festivals. They sound so different to the ones we would hold at home. Chifley shook his head. Some years the choir was loud enough, I swear, that half of Pixar could hear.
Sammy giggles. There were a few singing ones, but I don't think ours were ever that loud. It's then that the waiter returns with 2 piping hot plates. Here you 2 are. I hope you enjoy. The food looks delicious.
The plate put in front of Sammy had a delicately wound mound of spaghetti with 8 meatballs on top and a generous portion of the tomatoey sauce. Chifley's plate was empty at first. The waiter had behind him a cart with a cheese wheel larger than their heads sitting on it. Chifley just stared at it.
Sammy stared at it too, his eyes wide.
The cart was moved close, and there was a portion of pasta sitting in a hollow of the wheel. A few cracks of fresh pepper went on, and it was twirled with tongs, and then put onto Chifley's plate with practiced ease. A spoon then scraped at the inside of the hollow a little, and the half-melted cheese was put on top. A small bowl of Parmesan cheese was then placed on the table for Sammy. Enjoy!
Sammy's eyes were wide, his shading split between sky blue and sunny yellow, making him look like an impressionist painting of a summer's day sky. Oh, that's so cool! Thank you very much! The waiter grins and nods his head before leaving the 2 to his meal.
I almost thought that they were going to expect me to eat that whole wheel of cheese. Chifley giggled nervously.
Sammy giggles too. Me too. I didn't even know cheese got that big.
Chifley grinned at him. Well, best eat while it's hot, he said cheerfully.
Sammy's eyes crinkle in a smile. Yeah, he agrees, and jabs a fork into one of the meatballs. There is a smear frame of Sammy pulling down his mask and chomping down on the meatball, and then, Chifley, you blink and the mask is back in place. The meatball is gone in its entirety.
Chifley broke into giggles. You've practiced that movement a lot, I suppose.
Mm-hmm. Sammy's cheeks are bulging like a chipmunk as he chews. This is good, Chif. Have a meatball. He nudges his plate over a bit, looking at Chifley expectantly with his golden eyes sparkling.
He smiled and reached his fork out, taking one off his plate. It's a shame you have to hide your face, he said, taking a bite of the beef meatball. You're quite handsome.
There is a muffled squeak just after Sammy has swallowed. His face is pink, 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 and he pats his cheeks as if that would cause them to stop burning. Thanks. You're handsome too, Chifley, he says, before he reaches over to intertwine their fingers again. Maybe one day I won't have to. One day it'll be safe, and I can just be. I can just be with you and Gil. That sounds really nice.
Chifley smiled shyly. I don't think I'm handsome. Not like you or... He cut himself off.
Sammy gently rubs his thumb against Chifley's knuckles. I think you are, he says softly, the insecurity popping vibrantly in Chifley's voice, making his heart ache. It's okay if you don't believe me, but you trust me, right?
I trust you. I do. He fidgeted a little. I'm not used to anyone thinking I'm handsome.
Sammy's shading shifts to a gentle blue, and he slowly slides out of his seat. He walks over to Chifley and pulls him into a hug, dropping a kiss to his forehead. I'm so sorry that people made you feel like that, he quietly says into Chifley's hair.
He went stiff in Sammy's arms, as if any movement would ruin how wonderful this felt. Please don't be sad for my sake. I'm okay, he whispered.
Sammy just gently readjusts his grip, humming. If you can't believe it just yet, I guess I'll just keep having to tell you how handsome, special, and pretty I think you are. Sammy drops another kiss to Chifley's head, and then another. His shading is starting to shift to a lighter yellow edged with orange. I like you. A peck on the forehead. I like you. A peck on the right cheek. I like you. A peck on the nose. I like you a lot, Chifley Ford. A peck on the left cheek.
Chifley was all just blush at this point. He hid his face in his hands and managed a little squeak, at a loss for anything more comprehensive than that. But it was beyond a shadow of a doubt that Chifley did not oppose the sentiment in the slightest.
Sammy is giggling. He tucks Chifley underneath his chin and gently sways them both back and forth a little. I like you so much, Sammy sings. The melody is a bit janky, having been improvised on the spot, but Sammy's tone is perfect pitch, a clear boon from being a prismatone cleric. But having perfect pitch did not mean Sammy understood how to sing, especially when overflowing with giddy, mischievous glee and affection.
Chifley managed, wrapping his arms around him in return. You're too kind, Sammy, he squeaked out.
Sammy hums and just lets the moment be for the time being. He doesn't let go for a while, content to hold Chifley until Chifley was ready to be released.
Chifley was content for a good while before he pet Sammy's back gently. Thank you, Sammy, he whispered.
Sammy gently squeezes Chifley in one last hug before pulling back. Any time, Chif, he says warmly, a warm buttery gold with airbrushed rose settling in on his shading. He gently holds Chifley's hand in his as he slid back into his seat.
Chifley waited until Sammy was sitting back down before giving his hand a squeeze and letting go, picking up his fork. You have a beautiful singing voice.
Sammy blushes. Thanks. I don't really know how to use it, though. I just know how to make my colors look right, that's all.
Chifley blinked once, oddly, but then he smiled. I could teach you, if you like.
Sammy's yellow shading brightens to a highlight. Really? Oh, Chif, you could teach me your favorite song. I want to sing it for you. I want to sing with you. I know you say you don't really sing, but that's okay. Your music is pretty no matter what, and it means I get to spend even more time together if you wanted, and it'd be so much fun. And what does do re mean? Do re mean? I never could understand what music had to do with a female deer, and the excited babble spills out of Sammy like a tidal wave.
Chifley was taken aback by the response. It was much more enthusiastic than he was expecting. I can't. He looked away and pulled a face, but then looked back. I can still teach you, and I suppose you could sing along with the lyre, though I have not got my skills in that anywhere near performance level. He stopped and giggled. It doesn't have anything to do with deer.
Sammy's shading is pure grey now as he stares at Chifley in bafflement. Then why does there have a doe in it?
He giggled awkwardly. It doesn't. Doe, a deer, a female deer, that's what you mean, right? He said. Those words which would normally have been sung were spoken very carefully, almost in a deadpan.
Sammy nods. His eyebrows are creasing. Yeah, Chifley, I'm confused. He whines a little, pouting.
He smiled and took a bite of his meal before speaking again. That is from a song designed to help you remember the sulfur scale, he told him, which is just another way to think of the notes in an octave.
Sammy blinks. Oh, that makes sense. It's like a memory thing, then? He nibbles on some of his spaghetti in a quick smear frame.
Yeah, that's all that's about. He smiled fondly. I can teach you the basics of theory and some songs, though you're unfortunately singing solo, I'm afraid. Gil and I both don't sing. He trailed off slightly at the end, suddenly unsure if he should have said that or not.
Sammy gently shakes his head. I don't mind, he says softly. I just want to spend time with you and to understand the things you like a bit better. You or, Gil don't have to sing with me. I just like to sing to both of you if you'd let me. I just don't know how.
He fiddled with his napkin, smiling shyly.
There's a light bulb that suddenly alights above Sammy's head. Oh! It could be even something like the plot of Calamity Dame. You can play the main music and I can sing with you, maybe without you pretending to sing while I actually sing bit. That kind of would stress me out if I think about it. I don't know. I'm excited. I want to do music with you, Chifley. I want to know what you know and help you with performances and stuff. Sammy suddenly seems to realize what he's saying, and his shading turns bright hot pink. I mean, that's not that your performances are lacking. I like them a lot. He shoves another bite of spaghetti in his mouth to keep him from digging a bigger hole with his words.
I haven't seen that. Please don't worry about me performing, he said, also taking another bite. I would be more than happy to teach, though.
I'd love to learn from you, Chifley, Sammy said softly. And if you want, we could watch Calamity Dame together sometime if you wanted.
Sure. A pause. What is Calamity Dame?
It's a movie that the engineer did! It's a Western musical, the first one he's ever really directed like this. Sammy proceeds to explain the basic plot to Chifley, his shading a bright yellow, all the while taking smear frame aided bites.
Chifley didn't interrupt, smiling and nodding while he ate to show he was listening.
Sammy rambled for a good while, tending to get off topic in random but seemingly related topics. His shading was a bright sunshine yellow, and he gestured enthusiastically with his free hand.
Chifley's meal was long gone, and he was just listening to Sammy talk, a fond, kind of dopey look on his face.
Slowly, Sammy's plate emptied, and it was the scraping of a fork against the bare plate that broke Sammy out of his "movies are amazing, and I love them, let me share this love with you" reverie. I'm sorry, I've talked your ear off, Chif. Sammy's face is burning again, and his shading is hot pink.
It took Chifley an extra moment to realize that Sammy had stopped talking, and he jolted. No, it's fine.
Sammy's words. Sammy's flush spread to his shading and melded, turning his entire face hot pink. I'm okay? He reaches out again and takes Chifley's hand in his. Was your food good? He asked shyly.
His smile grew. Yeah, very cheesy. I'd certainly have it again.
Sammy lets out a warm hum, eyes creasing in a smile as the shading shifts to a warm, buttery yellow. I'm glad. It's right about then that the waiter comes back with the check. Sammy goes to grab it, but Chifley, you swipe it out from under just Sammy's nose. Sammy lets out an unfronted squeak.
Chifley smiled at him and looked down at the total for their meals. Not too expensive. I can cover it tonight, he offered.
Sammy shakes his head firmly. It's my treat tonight, he says, shading orange. I have enough for it.
He blinked. Are you sure? I thought you were saving to buy flowers and things for Prismatone. I don't mind.
Yeah, but this was my idea. I can get flowers later. Honestly, making sure the shrines are even ready for flowers is what I should be focusing on. He reaches over and gently puts his hand on the bill, not moving to take it quite yet. I can at least cover for tonight. Like you said, it's not that expensive.
He sighed a little, but let Sammy take it. I never asked what you do for work.
Sammy shuffles a bit, even as he's digging through his sleeve. Honestly, chasing Gil is kind of my job at this point, he says softly. Maybe I'd sell my paintings eventually? Because chasing Gil is fun, but... He trails off and heaves a conflicted sigh. He pulls out a small pouch of gold as it clinks together and picks out the right amount for the bill.
He tilted his head to one side. Do you get paid to chase him?
Sammy wiggles his hand. Only if he's targeting something big that people don't want him to get, like the diamond at that museum.
Ah, he nodded. Sounds like you need a job for the in-between moments, he mused. Gil likely just steals what he needs, huh?
Yeah, Sammy sighs. I just don't know what I'd do. I'm not a strong enough cleric to help that way, and I'm not really that well known to even be able to host an art gallery or anything like that. I do have enough money for tonight, though, he hastens to add.
You're good at gardening, he pointed out.
Oh, yeah, I suppose I am, and I like green things. Helping out at a flower shop would be nice, Sammy quietly muses. He stands up after putting the last gold coin down on the table and holds out his hand. Come on, I have one last place I want to show you before I take you home. His eyes are crinkled, and what Chifley would know was a wide grin.
Chifley stood and straightened his waistcoat before taking Sammy's hand. Lead the way.
Sammy leads him out of the restaurant, intertwining their fingers together. He leads Chifley down one more block, where a small hidden park was nestled. Come on, I think you'll think this is really cool.
He trotted along cheerfully beside him. Okay. Chifley couldn't remember a time where he was this happy. It was so weird, but very nice.
They enter the secluded park proper, and as they step through the invisible boundary between city and nature, the trees seem to transform with the perspective shift. Our camera zooms out as one by one the trees surrounding them start to glimmer and glow with white glimmers akin to stars, the leaves gently glowing in blue fluorescence of varying shades. And then there's the quiet sound of rustling chimes as the trees move gently in the breeze, a rippling of sky-blue leaves trailing through the grove, and as the ripple passes along, different bells start to join in, all of them coming from the gentle swaying of the glowing trees.
Chifley looked around in wonder. Whoa, what is this place? He whispered.
Sammy shrugs, but his grin is visible in the way his eyes crinkle. I don't really know what it's called. I've been taking to calling it the Starlight Bell Grove. I stumbled upon here a little while ago, and it made me think of you.
He blushed darkly. Of me?
Sammy hums, swinging their intertwined cans. Yeah, they're pretty, blue, and they make pretty music. Like you.
He spluttered again. My music wasn't that pretty. My efforts with the lyre when we met were appalling.
Sammy gently nudges him. But I liked it. I liked how you still were willing to try again. I don't care how awful it is. I like any music you make because even if it's grating to other people's ears.
He made a small squeak noise, blushing madly. You are too kind. He cupped both his cheeks in his hands, clearly overwhelmed, but managing to keep it together. I don't think anyone has said such nice things about me before.
Sammy pulls him into a tight hug, so tight that it squeezes the breath out of Chifley's lungs. The barbarian's arms engulf him entirely, and Sammy's hand cups the back of Chifley's head protectively. How dare they not? There is a growl there in Sammy's voice, mixed with the sound of grinding, gnashing teeth. You're wonderful, Chifley, and they're fools if they can't see that.
Chifley wheezed at the hug, eyes going wide at the ferocity of it. Sammy.
Sammy's arms loosen minutely, letting Chifley breathe, but he holds you close, Chifley, hands splayed out against your head, and his entire frame wrapped around you like he could shield you from the world. He's vibrating a little.
He reached up and pet Sammy's back gently. Please don't be angry. Things are very different back home. He paused and pondered quickly. Though you would be welcomed with open arms there. It would be a lovely place for someone like you.
Don't want to be welcomed in a place that would shame you for being yourself, Chif. Sammy vehemently denies, and then takes a moment to breathe. If they can't see past their own viewpoints to see that you are amazing for yourself, and not just what you can or can't do, then they aren't worth it, he says softly, but just as intensely as when he'd been raging.
It wasn't their fault. I didn't make myself very likable.
I can't imagine you being mean on purpose, Chif, Sammy says quietly. He pulls slightly away, one arm loosely draped over Chifley's shoulder, and the other hand reaching out to gently tilt Chifley's chin so they could look at each other's faces.
Chifley frowned sadly and looked away, leaving his chin in Sammy's grip. I'd rather not talk about it, he whispered.
Okay, Sammy says gently. His fingers trail up from Chifley's chin and cup his cheek, his thumb stroking a soothing pattern there. Chifley, would it be alright if I kissed you? His voice is quiet, gentle.
Chifley snapped back to Sammy, eyes going wide. The blush came back in force, his cheek warming under Sammy's hand. He swallowed hard, breath caught in his throat, then offered a very small nod.
Sammy's cheeks are burning, his shading buttery gold and rose pink, but he tugs off his mask and leans down, his hands gently cupping Chifley's head in a loose grasp. Chifley could back away at any point.
He was holding his breath, but he didn't move.
Their lips met, and it is soft and gentle and sweet.
Chifley's hands came up to cling at Sammy's dress gently, his held breath coming out in a small sigh as his eyes closed.
Sammy's own eyes flutter closed, and he gently cups the back of Chifley's head. His shading has shifted to a cherry blossom pink airbrushed with rose.
When they pulled apart, Chifley felt all floaty. He wasn't limp, he was his own weight, but he was basically limp otherwise. He opened his eyes and gazed up at Sammy, adoration and awe in his dark eyes.
Did you like that? Sammy asked in a hushed whisper, his shading still having not changed as he stared down at Chifley. He's still cupping Chifley's head, and his hands slide down to gently hold the smaller Toon's shoulders.
Chifley nodded mutely, seemingly unable to form words. As he gazed up at the taller Frankenali, music touched the air, a gentle violin playing gently and fondly with an otherworldly sounding instrument. Flute, maybe? Playing along beside it.
Sammy smiles, something soft and gentle and loving, despite how sharp his teeth are. His shading shifted to a bright yellow as he slowly reaches to cup Chifley's cheeks. Would you mind if I kissed you again? He whispered tenderly.
The music picked up excitedly, and Chifley nodded. He breathed, really like that.
Sammy does. It's a little braver this time, a little deeper, but it's still chaste, still sweet, and he finishes it by repeatedly kissing Chifley's face in succession, starting to giggle.
Chifley wobbled, a slew of feelings he wasn't used to, making him literally weak in the knees. When Sammy pulled away and moved on to kissing his cheeks, he somewhat slowly flopped to the cool grass on his rear. He had almost pulled Sammy down with him, but had not been holding on tight enough, so his hands slipped off the delicate fabric of his dress as he went down. The music was still playing in the background, a delighted boppy tempo to it.
Sammy giggles, gathering the folds of his dress and sitting next to Chifley, curling his arm and tucking the smaller Toon into his side.
Chifley would be purring if he were the sort of Toon to do so. This was really nice.
Yeah, it was, Sammy says softly, and then bends down and kisses the smaller Toon on the top of the head.
The music spiked in volume when that kiss made contact. That was my first kiss, he whispered.
Me too, Sammy says with a giggle. It was a really good one.
He blushed. I'm glad.
Sammy snuggles into his hold on Chifley and plonks his chin on the smaller Toon's head. Whenever you want, we could do this again? Maybe not exactly in public, but if you ever want one, you can just tell me, he says, and his cheeks are burning, but he's utterly earnest.
I wouldn't mind that, he admitted. The same goes for you too. Whenever you want.
Sammy hums, nodding. Yeah, he rests his cheek against Chifley's head and listens to the starlight bell trees chime and ring as the soft breeze drifts overhead.
Chifley snuggled into Sammy's side. Thank you for tonight, Sammy.
You're welcome. Thank you for being willing to humor me, he softly replies.
Chifley blinked at that and looked up at him. Humor you?
I mean, I didn't even know if you'd accept after Gil kidnapped you. Sammy gently traces circles against Chifley's arm. I mean, I wouldn't blame you if you'd wanted nothing to do with any of it afterwards. Gil can be a lot. His voice is fond, but also laced with quiet frustration.
That wasn't your doing, Chifley pointed out. And, well, if you... He paused. Like him. He trailed off.
I like both of you, Sammy says quietly. You and him. For different reasons. You're soft where he's sharp, quiet where he's loud, and insightful where he's not. And I I would really like to keep both of you in my life, if you'd have me. I really don't want to choose over both of you. I don't think my heart would take that.
Chifley looked up at Sammy for a long moment. We don't have to choose?
Sammy shakes his head, a small smile on his face. Oh, Prismatone told me that there were 3. And, well, I don't think we have to if we don't want to. He pauses, then looks down at Chifley, a look of dawning realization spreading onto his face. I don't know if Gil knows we don't have to choose.
Chifley looked down at his lap. We don't have to choose.
Not if we don't want to, Sammy says gently, and only if everyone wants to share in it. I won't force either of you to stay. I'd be okay. I like both of you too much to ever want either of you to feel trapped. We need to talk to Gil and make sure everyone is on the same page. Do you want to try that, if he's okay with it too? There is a quiet hope in his voice.
The music playing in the distance grew stronger, the slight solemn tones vanishing entirely, replaced by something that sounded almost giddy. A small smile slowly spread across Chifley's face. He seemed happy, and kind of relieved. I do want to try, he whispered.
Sammy gently places a kiss on Chifley's forehead. Okay, he says softly. His shading is a bright yellow, streaked with bright cyan. I'm glad. I'm really glad.
His smile grew even more. I do want to. Chifley blushed. He's very easy to talk to.
He is. He's very good at that. Sammy giggles. He's swaying a bit, side to side, gently rocking Chifley back and forth alongside him.
Chifley's eyes drooped a little. You and he have such pretty hair, he mumbled.
Sammy snuggles into Chifley a little bit more. So do you. He gently carves his fingers through the blue strands, shading buttery gold and airbrush rose. It's such a pretty blue, Chif.
The fingers through his hair didn't immediately put him to sleep like it did Sammy, but Chifley seemed completely relaxed. Lots of people have blue hair. It's nothing special. Father had blue hair, he mumbled. They had blue hair too.
They all did too. Well, I think it suits you. It's your color, and I think it looks nice. Sammy presses another kiss to Chifley's head. You don't have to be special to be pretty, Chifley. You can just be pretty for your own sake.
Chifley snuggled into Sammy fondly. Not pretty, he murmured. You're pretty. Your eyes are pretty.
Sammy's breath hitches a little. I'm glad you think so, he quietly whispers. And you are so very pretty, Chif. I love your button nose, your smile, the way your personality shines through your design. He gently holds Chifley, tender in every motion.
Chifley made a sleepy, dismissive gesture with one hand. Nah, he said. You, Gil, are so good, vibrant, and have such lovely music. I could listen to it all day. He closed his eyes. I wish you could hear it.
I do too, Sammy says gently, and then he reaches underneath Chifley and scoops him up into his arms, standing up in one smooth motion. Come on, let's get you back to your apartment, okay? It's time for a pretty tune to rest, I think.
Chif was jolted awake a bit as he was scooped up. He clung to Sammy in surprise. Ah!
It's okay. I have you, Sammy gently reassured, his arms tightening around Chifley a little bit more in a secure grip.
Blushed and nodded, not loosening his grip. You and Gil sure like carrying me around.
Mm-hmm, Sammy hums. He pauses, though, visibly realizing something. Hey, Chif? I don't want to put you down, but could you help put my mask back on?
Oh, sure. He reached a hand up to move the grey fabric over Sammy's nose. I would have thought that your hair would have been a bigger giveaway than your nose and mouth, he mused. It's pretty distinctive.
They didn't know about the hair. Not at first. Prismatone gave me rainbow hair after we met, Sammy says softly. And it's more about covering up. I'm usually showing less skin, which means less shadow. But I didn't want to hide. Not with you. The mask ultimately just... It's kind of like a safety blanket at this point. He kisses Chifley's fingers through the masks when they get close enough.
He nodded. Thanks. That means a lot.
Sammy hums as he starts to walk out of the park. I trust you a lot, Chifley, he says softly, his gaze gentle and affectionate.
Chifley kissed Sammy's cheek. He didn't really have any words. If the look on his face and the sound of the violin were any indication, he was utterly smitten.
Sammy giggles, a little delighted sound as his visible shading shifted to bright, bright yellow.
I've had a really good time, he whispered. Thanks for inviting me.
I'm glad. Sammy sighs warmly. Thanks for coming. They've left the quiet sanctuary of the Starlight Bell Grove, re-entering the urban landscape that is Toontown. It had finally grown dark while they had spent their time in the grove, warmly lit streetlight lanterns guiding their way back to Chifley's apartment 3 blocks down. A tiny bit of a walk, but still rather feasible if Chifley ever wanted to visit there again.
Chifley made note of where it was as they made their way back to his apartment. He had such an unfamiliar lightness in his heart, and it was just so nice. So very wonderfully nice. He cuddled Sammy the whole way home. Wasn't going to be having nightmares tonight, he was certain of that.
Once they reached the doorstep of Chifley's apartment, Sammy gently deposits the smaller Toon on his feet. There you are. Safely delivered home, he softly says.
He smiled up at Sammy, smiling. Do you know what Gil called me when he took me to his lair? He asked.
Sammy tilts his head, his shading turning a blue-tinted evergreen. What did he call you, Chiv?
He called me the damsel, he told him. And you carrying me home like that just made me think of it.
Sammy's face and shading turns pink. Oh.
His smile grew when he took Sammy's hand to kiss the back of it. I don't think I mind. You're both very strong. I don't mind being carried around by you. And while I didn't have the best time with Gil last time, I suspect there will be more to come. And I don't mind that either. He smirked. My hero.
The noise that comes out of Sammy's mouth is a squeak. He can feel his knees grow weak, and he has to lean up against the doorframe to keep from falling over entirely as his shading grows more saturated. Chif. He stares at Chifley, his heart in his mouth, and a little unbeknownst to him, heart's floating up behind his head. He reaches out and cups Chif's cheek. I don't mind being your hero, he whispers in a hoarse voice, his thumb stroking up and down against the soft curvature of Chifley's skin.
The hearts just made him grin wider, and the music playing for him swelled into the musical equivalent. Did you want to come in for a cup of tea? Or did you need to get home?
I can stay for tea, Sammy says quietly. Barkson knows I'm with you.
He smiled and unlocked his door, letting Sammy into the modest apartment, heading for the kitchen to fill the kettle.
Sammy follows and shuts the door, his expression soft. He slides the mask down so it loosely curls around his neck.
Chifley pulled 2 mugs out of the cupboard and put tea in them, waiting for the kettle to boil. He was bouncing in his step in time with the music that Sammy could still hear.
Sammy giggles happily at the sight, and he approaches Chifley from where he's in the kitchen. Want to dance a little for a bit while we wait for the tea to steep? He quietly asks.
He froze as his hand reached for the kettle. Dance?
Sammy hums a little. I can kind of hear it. The music. It's really bouncy and nice. It makes me want to scoop you up and dance with you.
Yeah. You can hear it? What does it sound like? Yours or mine? His jaw was open in shock.
Sammy hums, tilting his head to listen. I don't really hear any cello, but there's a flute, I think, and violins. It's really nice.
He blushed. That's mine, he whispered. You can hear my theme.
It's a pretty theme, Chifley, Sammy says softly, reaching out to take his hand in his. I don't hear it a lot, but it popped up, and it's been so nice to listen to as we've talked.
Chifley blushed. I don't know how I'm doing that. Marcel said that when they first saw me, they heard some of the music too, but I certainly wasn't in a state to do it on purpose then.
Maybe it's like mine seeing people's voices sometimes, Sammy says softly. Maybe it's something to do with the soundtrack. You're their cleric, right?
He nodded. Yes, they gave me my magic.
Prismatone did for me as well. I didn't have any magic before I met her, and then I started seeing people's colors on and off. It's been nice.
I've never done this before, though. He paused. Well, I suppose at home there would be no need.
Sammy hums, nodding. If everyone could hear it, you wouldn't notice the change.
He nodded. I don't know why we can hear it. It isn't as though only those who serve, like I do, can. Missy can too, but she can't do any magic, let alone some of the things I can do.
Sammy hums thoughtfully. Maybe the hearing it naturally is something from the score. But you letting everyone hear it, maybe that's because the soundtrack likes you, Chif. And then Sammy reaches out and pulls Chifley into his arms as if they are about to dance. He's grinning wildly down at Chifley, teeth sharp but the expression warm and fond and a little mischievous. So, do you want to dance?
Chifley's eyes suddenly went wide, his pupils shrinking and his body going stiff. The violin screeched abruptly.
Sammy freezes too. It's okay. I should have asked. I'm sorry. Any jovial, joking manner is gone, replaced immediately by concern. Are you okay, Chifley?
He was trembling.
It's okay. Sammy gently pulls Chifley into a hug, rubbing his shoulders and making sure to avoid fully touching his back. It's okay. You can tell me if you want, or if you could just wait for the water to boil and I can take over making tea and we can relax for a bit. It's going to be okay. He brushes away Chifley's bangs and kisses his forehead.
Chifley clung to him. No, he whimpered.
Sammy just holds him, humming soothingly. Let's go sit on the couch at least. Get you comfortable. He reaches behind Chifley and moves the teapot off the burner, turning off the stove. The tea can wait for a little bit. I'm gonna pick you up for a second. Is that okay?
He shook his head.
Okay, let's just walk you over to the couch, okay? Sammy is speaking softly, and he gently wraps a comforting arm around Chifley's shoulders, guiding him over to the couch. He sits next to Chifley, the tune tucked against his side, but his grip loose. If Chifley needed to, he could get up any time. I'm sorry I upset you, Chifley, he said, still in that soft tone. His shading is a light blue, but his expression is so deeply concerned. Are you okay?
Chifley sat down on the couch and then curled into a ball, shaking.
Sammy hesitates before he touches Chifley again. Can I touch you, Chif? He asks quietly. His shading is a soft light blue and periwinkle.
There was a long pause, but then Chifley nodded a little.
Okay. Thank you for letting me know, he softly says, and he reaches out to gently start rubbing small, soothing circles on Chifley's shoulders, avoiding at all costs the wound on his back. He quietly hums a soft, soothing melody.
It took a long while for Chifley to calm down, relaxing under Sammy's doings. Sorry.
You don't have to apologize. Not for something that clearly triggered you, he softly says.
He whimpered softly. You wanted to dance. The music had vanished now, the violin silent to Sammy's ears.
If it upset you, I don't mind not doing it. You're more important to me than dancing or singing or anything else that could possibly hurt and make you upset. Sammy is still rubbing his shoulders, and he drops a kiss on Chifley's head. I wanted to dance because it would have been fun for both of us. If neither of us is having fun, then it's not worth doing.
Chifley snuggled up into Sammy's lap. It wasn't the dancing, he whispered.
Can you tell me what it is so I don't do it again? Sammy cautiously asked. I don't want to hurt you, Chif.
He opened his mouth and then closed it again, shaking his head. I can't.
It's okay. Sammy gently rubs at Chifley's arm. Do you want me to guess? And you can say yes or no?
He shook his head again, firmer. No, just, let it go, please.
But I hurt you, Sammy whispered.
Chifley's hands gripped at Sammy's dress desperately. He's...
Okay. Sammy drops another kiss to Chifley's hair. Okay, I'll drop it. I am so sorry, Chifley.
He relaxes a bit and nuzzles Sammy's leg. Not your fault, he whispered.
Sammy gently carves his hands through Chifley's hair. His fingers run patterns against Chifley's scalp. He's quiet.
Chifley was relaxing more and more as time went on. His head was slowly becoming heavier and heavier against Sammy's lap as he started to doze off.
Sammy keeps doing what he's doing. He quietly, subtly wipes at his eyes with a quiet hitch of breath. Then he places his fingers to his lips and presses the past-tone kiss to Chifley's exposed cheek. Bending down would wake Chifley up. And the smaller Toon was exhausted.
A few moments later and he was deep asleep, limp against Sammy.
Sammy rests his hand against Chifley's side and lets him sleep. His head is tilted back, and he sighs, staring up at the ceiling. Whoever had hurt Chifley was going to pay if they weren't already dead.
Chifley slept quietly, and even though he had fallen asleep shaken, Sammy easily kept the nightmares at bay. And that's the end.
And that's the end of Date Night 2, Electric Boogaloo. Thank you all for joining us. I hope you enjoyed.
Oh, the mysteries keep piling up. Oh, boy.